Somewhere in motorcycle history, a design crossed a line it was never supposed to cross. It was taken, broken down, and rebuilt piece by piece until it started showing up in machines that had no right to feel that good. And once that happened, originality stopped mattering. The best-built version of that design won, and the original slowly faded out. Riders didn't follow names anymore. They followed what worked, what lasted, and what didn't leave them stranded. And that shift didn't happen overnight. It built quietly, one machine at a time, until the industry itself changed direction. Stay with me, because this story is about how one stolen idea ended up shaping the bikes you see today, and why its influence is still riding with you. The design that actually worked. There was a time when a motorcycle didn't need to prove itself with numbers. It proved itself by starting every morning, by running all day, and by getting you home without drama. The design at the center of this story was exactly that kind of machine. Simple lines, clean layout, and nothing on it that didn't have a purpose. You could look at it once and understand how it worked, even before you picked up a wrench. The engine was straightforward, built with a focus on durability rather than pushing limits. Fewer moving parts meant fewer things to fail. Clear access points meant you didn't have to tear the whole bike apart just to fix one issue. It was designed for riders who actually rode, not for showrooms or magazines. You could service it with basic tools, on the side of the road if you had to, and keep going without waiting for a dealer or special parts. What made it stand out wasn't flashy innovation, but restraint. It was built to be dependable, earning its reputation 1 mile at a time. Riders trusted it, not because it impressed, but because it never failed. That trust spread quietly through experience, passed from rider to rider, mechanic to mechanic. It wasn't manufactured, it was earned. Everything pointed to one truth. It was built to last. And when something that solid leaves the right hands, the consequences don't stay small. A shift was already underway, though most people didn't notice it yet. When control quietly slipped away, the design didn't disappear overnight, and it wasn't taken in some dramatic moment. What happened was slower, quieter, and in many ways more dangerous. The original builders lost control of something they didn't fully realize could be taken. Not physically, but structurally. Once the knowledge behind that machine moved beyond the walls where it was created, it stopped belonging to just one place. At the time, there was little in the way of real protection. Designs were shared, studied, and sometimes distributed without much thought about long-term consequences. What mattered in the moment was rebuilding, producing, and moving forward. The idea that a motorcycle design could become the foundation for an entire global shift wasn't something anyone was focused on. It was just another piece of engineering, sitting among many others. Once the drawings, measurements, and principles reached new hands, everything changed. These builders saw a proven system, free from the original limits, and understood its value immediately. The design was no longer contained. It could be studied and rebuilt anywhere. Its simplicity, once a strength, became a weakness, making it easy to reproduce. No alarm sounded, but control was lost. It wasn't taken, it was given away through exposure, and once that happens, it cannot be reclaimed. What followed wasn't chaos. It was something far more subtle and far more important. If you're starting to see how deep this really goes, take a second to like the video, subscribe for more real breakdowns, and share your take below. The first time something felt familiar. At first, it didn't look like anything unusual. A new motorcycle shows up, maybe from a different manufacturer, maybe from a different country. On the surface, it seems like just another entry into the market. But then you look closer. The proportions feel right in a way that's hard to explain. The way the engine sits, the way the components line up, it all feels familiar. You ride it, and that feeling becomes clearer. The response, the balance, even the way it delivers power. It reminds you of something you've already known. Mechanics started noticing it too. Open one up, and the layout makes sense immediately. Not because it's new, but because it follows a pattern that already works. This wasn't coincidence. These machines shared the same foundation, solving the same problems, with identical logic beneath different badges and finishes. At first, it was easy to dismiss, since good ideas often spread, but as more appeared, the pattern became impossible to ignore. They stayed close to the original concept. Riders noticed the familiarity immediately. You could ride a different machine and feel like you already understood it, raising questions about where that familiarity truly came from and why. Once that question started forming, the story moved into a different phase entirely. If you're starting to notice how much of riding comes down to what actually works, take a look at the description. The gear and accessories there follow that same idea, simple, proven, and built to last, the ones who built it better. Copying a design is one thing. Building it better is something else entirely. And this is where the real shift began. Some manufacturers didn't just replicate what they saw, they focused on how it was made. Tighter machining, more consistent assembly, better control over materials. The blueprint stayed similar, but the execution improved. Small differences started showing up in real use. Engines ran smoother. Components lasted longer. Fewer leaks, fewer breakdowns, fewer unexpected problems. These weren't dramatic changes you'd see in a spec sheet. They were the kind you notice after months of riding, when one machine keeps going and another starts asking for attention. That consistency changed everything. Riders stopped caring about origin and focused on performance. If one machine needed less work, held together better, and caused fewer headaches, the choice became clear. Loyalty fades when reliability is at stake. The original creators still had the design, but lost the advantage as others built it more efficiently. In a market that rewards what works daily, execution matters more than history. Control shifted not by force, but by who could build it best. From here, the story stops being about one machine and starts becoming something much bigger. How tearing down became the playbook. What started as curiosity slowly turned into routine. Shops began pulling machines apart not just to fix them, but to understand them. Every bolt, every port, every measurement was studied. Not casually, but with intent. If something worked well, it wasn't enough to admire it. It had to be understood, documented, and rebuilt. Mechanics, who once focused only on repairs, began paying attention to patterns. Why one engine ran cooler. Why another held compression longer. Why certain parts wore slower. These weren't random observations anymore. They became part of a larger effort to learn from what others had already figured out. The process shifted from fixing problems to extracting knowledge. Manufacturers followed the same path on a larger scale, studying existing machines instead of starting from scratch. Teams analyzed every detail, clearances, materials, assembly, until designs could be recreated precisely. Secrecy faded as similar machines appeared across brands, connected beneath the surface. What once seemed like copying became expected. Over time, this approach turned into strategy. Building a motorcycle now meant studying others first, making shared knowledge the foundation, not a shortcut, and the industry fully adapted. That shift changed how machines were developed moving forward, setting the stage for something even more decisive. When refinement beat originality. Once the foundation was understood, attention moved to something else entirely. Improvement, not in dramatic leaps, but in small, controlled steps. Better materials replaced weaker ones. Machining became more precise. Assembly tightened up. Each change on its own seemed minor, but together they transformed how the machines performed over time. Engines began running smoother, not because they were completely redesigned, but because tolerances were tighter and parts fit the way they were supposed to. Seals held longer, bearings lasted. The kind of issues that once felt normal started disappearing. You didn't have to accept leaks or constant adjustments anymore. The machines simply worked better. What stood out most wasn't straight-line performance, but consistency. One bike behaved like the next, with fewer surprises. building trust quickly, even if riders couldn't. Explain why. Meanwhile, older versions began showing their age. Not from poor design, but from slower evolution. What once felt reliable now required more attention. That's where the balance shifted. The original idea still mattered, but execution mattered more, and riders chose what ran cleaner, lasted longer, and required less effort. From that point forward, originality stopped being the deciding factor. Something else began shaping outcomes entirely. The blind spot, that cost everything. While some companies were refining and improving, others stood still. Not because they lacked skill, but because they believed they didn't need to change. Their designs had worked for years. Their names carried weight. That history created confidence, but it also created a blind spot. They saw the new machines, but they didn't interpret them correctly. Instead of recognizing a shift in how motorcycles were being built, they viewed it as temporary, something that would pass. They assumed riders would return to what they knew once the novelty wore off. That assumption turned out to be a mistake. Inside those companies, decisions were shaped by past success. If something had worked before, it was expected to keep working. Changes were slow, cautious, sometimes delayed altogether. There was a belief that identity mattered more than adaptation, that staying true to what they had always done would be enough. Meanwhile, the industry kept moving, with steady improvements in production and quality. The gap grew slowly, easy to overlook, until it became obvious. The real issue wasn't ignorance, but misjudgment. The signs were there, but ignored, and by the time it was clear, the advantage had already shifted beyond recovery. That realization didn't come all at once. It showed up in a place where it mattered most. The moment trust changed hands. The change didn't begin in factories or boardrooms. It started with riders, people who spent real time on these machines, who noticed how they behaved over thousands of miles. At first, the differences were small. A bike that needed less adjustment, one that started easier, another that simply felt more predictable day after day. Those details added up. One experience turned into another. Riders began comparing notes, sometimes without even realizing it. Conversations shifted from brand pride to practical outcomes. Which one held up better? Which one required less work? Which one made ownership easier instead of harder? That's where the shift became real. Loyalty didn't vanish overnight. It gave way to experience. When a machine delivered fewer problems, it earned trust regardless of origin, and that trust stuck. Decisions changed steadily as riders looked elsewhere. Not from frustration, but practicality. They chose what worked. The market didn't flip instantly. It moved quietly, one decision at a time, until the direction became clear for everyone watching. And once trust changes hands like that, the rest of the industry has no choice but to follow. The decisions that locked the outcome. By the time the shift was clear, the response should have been simple: improve, compete, and match what was changing. Instead, a different path was taken. Rather than stepping into the fight, many companies stepped away from it. Segments that once mattered were quietly abandoned. Smaller machines were left behind. Mid-range bikes disappeared from lineups. The focus moved upward, toward larger models and higher prices, where they believed competition would be weaker. That decision felt safe at the time. If the lower end was becoming crowded, the logic was to move away from it. Let others compete over volume, while they held on to prestige. But that move created a gap. And once that gap opened, it didn't stay empty. It filled quickly with machines that were easier to build, easier to buy, and easier to maintain. Each step back gave someone else a step forward. Instead of improving their designs to meet new expectations, they repositioned themselves into smaller corners of the market. What used to be a broad presence became narrow. Fewer choices, higher costs, and less accessibility. Riders who might have stayed were left with fewer reasons to do so. The opportunity wasn't taken, it was handed over through a series of decisions pointing in the same direction. Avoid the fight, protect the image, hold the line. Over time, those choices stacked up until reversing course became harder than continuing. Nothing forced those decisions. The tools, knowledge, and designs were still there. Instead, steady retreat narrowed the field until the outcome became fixed, not suddenly, but gradually over time. The consequences of those choices didn't stay hidden for long. The numbers that told the real story. At some point, perception stops mattering and numbers take over. What had once been debated in conversations became visible in production and sales. Factories that used to lead were producing fewer machines each year. Others, once considered secondary, were increasing output at a pace that couldn't be ignored. Production gaps widened quickly. One side struggled to maintain steady output, while the other scaled up with consistency. More units, more availability, and more options at different price points. That difference showed up everywhere, from dealerships to service shops. One brand might have a waiting list. Another had inventory ready to move. Pricing followed the same pattern. As production increased, costs were managed more effectively. Machines became more accessible without sacrificing quality. Meanwhile, those who had retreated upward were left with higher prices and fewer buyers. The gap between value and cost became harder to justify. Over time, the numbers told a story no one could argue with. It wasn't about opinions or history, but what was available, what lasted, and what made sense to own. Scale became the deciding factor, with consistent production, reliability, and long-term support mattering most. Riders saw it clearly in real life. And once the numbers aligned in one direction, the rest of the market followed. The next stage wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about what disappeared because of them. If this story changed how you see motorcycles, make sure you're subscribed. This is the kind of truth most channels avoid. And there's more coming that digs even deeper into how the industry really works behind the scenes. When names started disappearing. The first signs were subtle, fewer models being offered, shorter production runs, quiet announcements about restructuring or consolidation. At first, it felt temporary, like adjustments that would eventually stabilize. But as time passed, those signs grew harder to ignore. Entire brands that had been part of the road for decades began fading out. Factories slowed down, then stopped. Production lines that once ran continuously went silent. Names that had defined generations of riders became harder to find, then disappeared entirely. What had once been common sights became rare, then absent. It wasn't just about machines, it was about identity. For many riders, those brands represented more than transportation. They were tied to memories, to long rides, to a certain way of thinking about motorcycles. Watching them fade wasn't just a market shift, it felt personal. Something familiar was being lost, replaced by machines that worked well, but didn't carry the same history. The impact spread beyond companies. Suppliers, dealers, and communities built around those machines felt it. Knowledge passed through experience, lost relevance as the machines disappeared. What vanished wasn't just production, but continuity between past and present. Once gone, it didn't return. New machines filled the gap, but created something different. That's when it became clear this wasn't a cycle, but a shift from one system to another. And once that transition settled, a new standard took its place. The new standard. Everyone had to accept. What replaced the old system didn't arrive with a clear announcement. It built itself gradually, through consistency and repetition. Machines that started easily, ran reliably, and required less attention became the expectation rather than the exception. What had once stood out became normal. Reliability moved from being a selling point to being a baseline. Riders no longer expected to adjust, repair, and manage constant issues. They expected the machine to work day after day without interruption. That shift changed how motorcycles were judged. Not by how they felt in a single ride, but by how they held up over time. Consistency followed the same path. One machine matched another. Quality didn't vary as much. You didn't have to search for a good example, you could expect one. That predictability made ownership easier. It removed uncertainty. And once that becomes standard, it's hard to accept anything less. Accessibility completed the picture as higher production and tighter control made machines easier to find and afford, bringing more riders onto the road with fewer limitations. It all traced back to the same foundation, a design that proved itself, spread, and evolved into something universal. What once felt special didn't disappear but blended into everything else. The uniqueness faded, replaced by a new standard built not on who created it, but on how well it could be repeated consistently. At that point, there was no going back. The industry didn't recover from what happened. It moved forward into something new, shaped by decisions, by numbers, and by the quiet shift in what riders came to expect. The design that never really disappeared. Long after the names changed and the factories shifted, the core of that original design never actually went away. You can still see it if you know where to look. The layout, the balance between simplicity and function, the way the engine breathes and delivers power, those ideas didn't vanish. They were carried forward, adapted, and folded into machines that look completely different on the surface. Most riders don't notice it because the details have been refined over time. Materials improved, tolerances tightened, components became more advanced. But underneath all of that, the same principles are still doing the work. The same logic that made the original machine reliable continues to shape how modern engines are built and how they perform over long distances. That's the part that often gets missed. People focus on brand names, styling, or new features, but the foundation remains connected. The original design solved problems in a way that was hard to improve upon, so instead of replacing it, the industry built around it. Each generation added something, but the base stayed recognizable. You could take a modern machine apart and trace elements back through decades of development, not in a straight line, but through a chain of influence that never fully broke. What began as a single solution became part of a larger system, moving across borders, companies, and time. The name may change, but the thinking remains. That persistence reveals something important. Good designs don't disappear, they adapt, spread, and continue shaping machines in ways most riders never notice. Which raises a bigger question about what originality really means in this space. Why nothing stays unique for long. Once a design proves itself, it doesn't stay isolated for very long. Information moves quickly, especially in a field where performance and reliability are constantly being tested in the real world. Engineers change jobs, ideas get shared, studied, and reworked. What one company develops today becomes part of the broader conversation tomorrow. This isn't about copying in the simple sense. It's about movement. Designs evolve as they pass through different hands. One group adjusts materials, another refines production, and third, changes the way components interact. By the time it settles, it's no longer identical to where it started, but the connection is still there. The pace of that movement has only increased. What once took years to spread now happens much faster. A new approach doesn't stay hidden behind factory walls. It gets noticed, analyzed, and incorporated into other machines. Whether companies admit it or not, they are constantly learning from each other. That creates a cycle where effective designs become reference points, studied, improved, and released again as new versions. Over time, even distinct ideas blend into a wider system. For riders, this explains why machines from different manufacturers begin to feel similar. The differences still exist, but they become subtle. In that environment, originality fades quickly while execution takes over. What lasts isn't the idea itself, but how well it's built, how it performs, and how it holds up in real use. That shift doesn't just affect manufacturers. It changes what happens in the garage as well. What changed in the garage? The impact shows up where it matters most, in day-to-day ownership. Over time, motorcycles became easier to live with. Fewer unexpected breakdowns, longer service intervals, more predictable performance. The kind of improvements that don't always make headlines, but make a difference every time you turn the key. That reliability opened things up. More riders could get on the road without worrying about constant maintenance. You didn't need deep mechanical knowledge just to keep a machine running. The barrier to entry lowered, and the experience became more consistent across different models. At the same time, something else started to fade. The distinct character that once separated one machine from another became less pronounced. Where you used to feel a clear difference between brands, the gap narrowed. Not completely, but enough that it became harder to define. You could still tell them apart, but it took more attention. Differences shifted from obvious traits to smaller details. Sound, feel, and behavior grew more refined, yet more alike, and the edge that defined each machine softened. That trade-off is easy to miss. Better performance and reliability simplify riding, but they reshape the bond between rider and machine. What you gain in consistency, you lose in contrast, and the garage becomes more predictable, less distinct over time. That balance between improvement and individuality is part of a larger pattern that runs through the entire industry. The truth behind every motorcycle you see today. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, a pattern becomes clear. The industry doesn't run on isolated ideas. It runs on shared knowledge that moves from one place to another, constantly evolving along the way. What matters isn't who had the idea first, it's who develops it, refines it, and builds it well enough to stand the test of time. The story of that. Original design shows how this process works. It began as a practical solution, spread beyond its origin, and became part of something much larger. Along the way, it was improved, reshaped, and integrated into machines that carry its influence, without always showing it. That's the reality behind most motorcycles on the road today. They aren't created in isolation, but built from layers of ideas, tested, shared, and refined over years. Each machine carries what came before. Understanding that shifts focus away from ownership and toward execution. What matters isn't who designed it first, but who builds it to work in the real world. In the end, machines that last prove it, while others quietly disappear over time. The motorcycle that changed everything didn't do it by staying in one place. It moved, it evolved, and it shaped an entire system without most people ever noticing it happening. And that's the part most riders don't see. The bikes changed, but the thinking behind them never really did. One design moved, evolved, and quietly reshaped everything you ride today. So now, I want to hear from you. Have you noticed this shift? Or is it something most riders still miss? Drop your thoughts below, because this is where real experience matters. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like and subscribe for more straight motorcycle stories like this.